began to ignore every commandment. And instead of going to him when they got sick, or when they needed rain on the land, or when they needed some extra crops, or when their women wasn't fruit, that back then women had to have kids, or they just wasn't very good women. You know, things have changed nowadays, but anyway, that's the way it was. And they would go to these idols not just to have a religious function to go, to, and a spiritual exercise to engage in. No, they went to them in hopes of getting something from them. We come to you, great God of the Nile, or whatever, all the moon and all, and they look for blessings from them. So they began to bring stuff to them. And one thing they demanded, and those priests would say, can you imagine the evil that possessed these men? About the same kind you see in Planned Parenthood places, as far as I'm concerned. You've got to be a wicked, vile person. They could see a little child. Incidentally, I've got a film. I'll let any of you use it at once. It's called Unplanned. It's a story of a true story. I know a woman that told me how one of her daughters will have do some of the stuff in that movie. And it talks about it. And what brought this woman out, that she saw the doctor, they had to bring her in there. And she was not a religious person at all, but said the doctor started to perform it and said the baby they could see it. What do they call that? Debbie, what's that called? The ultrasound. They could see the baby drawing back. She looked and said, he's drawing back from me. And the doctor said, oh, they always do that. And he ran down and sucks and pulls and rips that baby out of there. She left, and that was it. High paid individual on that. And she left. Anyway, I got to get to this or we ain't going to get done. They began doing that, and this man, this god of Dagon or Molech and all of that, he wants your children. Oh, but we'll give him a little crying baby that the mother held, gave birth to, and take it up there and hand it over to this despicable man. I think I'd have brought him up there and said, I'm bringing him to you. Oh, can I hold on just a minute? I got something else I want to give you. And I'd have tried to knock him out. They take them babies and sacrifice, lay them on the arms of that thing that's burning, and they scream and they burn them to such hideous. And you know what? The children of Israel got so good at it that they could outdo the nations that were around them that never had known God. God didn't just let this go on. He sent prophets to them, and he warned them, and he warned them, and he warned them. After a while, they got so bad, something had to be done. Look at 1 or 2 Kings chapter 17. We got just 2 or 3 more. I've got to rush. Where we at? It ain't too bad. Look at verse 4. Or hold it. Let's go to verse 6. 2 Kings chapter 17, verse 6. In the 9th year of Hoshea, the king of Assyria took Samaria and carried Israel away into Assyria and placed them in Hala and in Habor by the river of Gozan, in the cities of the Medes. And so it was that the children of Israel had sinned against the Lord their God, which had brought them up out of the land of Egypt, from under the hand of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and had feared other gods, and walked in the statutes of the heathen, whom the Lord cast out from before the children of Israel, and of the kings of Israel which they had made. And the children of Israel did secretly those things that were not right against the Lord their God. And they built them in high places in all their cities, in the tower of the watchman and the fenced city. And they set up images and groves in every high hill, under every tree. And they burnt incense in the high places, as did the heathen whom the Lord carried away before them, and wrought wicked things to provoke the Lord to anger. For they served idols, whereof the Lord had said, you shall not do this thing. Yet the Lord testified against Israel and against Judah by all the prophets, by all the seers, saying, turn ye from your evil ways, and keep my commandments and my statutes, according to all the law which I commanded your fathers, which I sent unto you by my servants the prophets. Notwithstanding, they would not hear, but hardened their necks like the neck of their fathers that did not believe in the Lord their God, and they rejected his statutes and his covenant that he made with their fathers, and his testimonies which he testified against them, and they followed vanity, and became vain, and went after the heathen that were round about them, concerning whom the Lord had charged them that they should not do like them. And they left all the commandments of the Lord their God, and made them molten images, even 2 calves, and made a grove, and worshiped all the host of heaven, and served Baal. And they caused their sons and their daughters to pass through the fire, and used divination and enchantments, and sold themselves to do evil in the sight of the Lord, to provoke him to anger. Therefore the Lord was very angry with Israel, and removed them out of his sight. There was none left but the tribe of Judah only, and Judah kept not the commandments of the Lord their God, but walked in the statutes of Israel which they made. And the Lord rejected all the seed of Israel, and afflicted them, and delivered them into the hand of spoilers, until he had cast them out of his sight. Now think of that. This was a people who had enjoyed a degree of blessing like nobody else. But look what they come to. We're going to show you just a couple of more things. Go right on over to the book of Jeremiah. I want you to see how that this had come. I'm telling you, okay, there we are. How this had come from all those things that we read. This is the same people. Those wonderful things that we just read, did you see what we just read? You'd think they was 2 different people. No, people didn't even know nothing. But no, these were and this is how God spoke to them. I ain't going to put up with this. They were his people. He had redeemed them. They were his possession. He had a right to do with them what he wanted. Now, look here how God is now speaking to this people that he spoke so kindly to, so generous, warm blessings, promises of blessing on top of blessing. Look at Jeremiah 7. Look at verse 13. He says, and now, because you have done all these works, saith the Lord, and I spake to you, rising up early and speaking, but you heard not. And I called you, but you answered not. Therefore will I do unto this house which is called by my name, wherein you trust, and unto the place which I gave to you and to your fathers, as I've done to Shiloh, and I will cast you out of my sight, as I have cast out all your brethren, even the whole seed of Ephraim. Now listen to this. This blows my mind. Remember how wonderful he spoke to them over there in Deuteronomy. Look what he says here to his people. Therefore, he's speaking to Jeremiah here, pray not thou for this people, neither lift up cry, nor prayer for them, neither make intercession to me. Why? For I will not hear you. Folks, this is the same bunch, the same crowd that he had spoken that we just talked of, all the wonderful, I've chose you, I've blessed you, I delivered you, redeemed you, brought you, fed you, to all these things. Now he's telling Jeremiah, don't even pray for him. You pray for me to them, I won't even listen to a thing you say. How in the world do you get from this place over here to this place here? Go on ahead over one more scripture here to Jeremiah 30. I have never in my life seen such a hopeless, sad verse in the Bible in all my days as when I read about this message delivered to the covenant people of God through the ministry of a prophet by the name of Jeremiah. Selected by God. God put his word, put his finger in his mouth, put his words on Jeremiah's mouth and said, prophesy to the house, to the people of God there. His message was not popular, neither was it received, but it came to pass. And look what he says here in Jeremiah 30. This is what he says about these people that we read all this wonderful stuff about. For thus saith the Lord, thy bruise is incurable, and thy wound is grievous. There is none to plead thy cause, that thou mayest be bound up. Thou hast no healing medicines. Think of that. Now this is God's peace. He said, you know what? You've gotten so bad that there's not a spiritual listen, what I'm saying is this, guys, and I'm trying to draw a, what do you call that, analogy here. When it gets to a place that you can take any man you want, and that man can be with God, shut in a secret place, and talking to God, and God placed the Holy Ghost in that man, and placed the anointing of God on him, and say, preach my word. And he goes, and there is not a sermon that he can get from God that is so inspired that it'll move people's hearts.
All right.
When you get to that place, there's no hope. When a nation gets to that place where they're not moved by no warnings, you know where this is headed, where I'm going to end that. I got one more to give you here very quickly. I'm running out of time, but in Matthew 23, Jesus Christ of Nazareth. I want you to see what happened here to these people that had all this good stuff that I read to you about. They were blessed with demonstrations of power like nobody else. Elijah called fire out of heaven. Elisha smote entire armies blind. Poured salt in water and made it good to drink. Miracles, dead brought to life. Come with flaming words of rebuke right from the throne of God, which were full of abundant life and blessing. Had people have received it. The Word of God, unadulterated, untainted by organizations of man. This people now, finally at last, in fulfillment of prophecies that had been uttered from the mouths of these great men of God time and time again, here comes the Son of God, Emmanuel, God standing there behind a wall of flesh. And the religious people had gotten so far, they saw themselves as so in tune with heaven, and they were so in tune, they didn't even know the scriptures that they read being fulfilled under their nose. How blind had they got? How far had they drifted? How much hatred in their heart? They didn't even realize it maybe themselves, because here was the Son of God, the one that had been prophesied about, the Messiah, and they were sitting around with murder in their hearts, vicious hatred, trying to figure out a way to get him killed. Real spiritual folks, weren't they? And they were the leaders of that nation. Jesus taught in the temple regularly. And what did he say when he drove the money changers out? Can somebody tell me? He said, my Father's house will be called a house of prayer, but you've made it a den of thieves. What did he say? My Father's house. He called it his Father's house. But here, he stands right just a few days prior to his crucifixion. And in this chapter of Matthew 23, he addresses the religious leaders of that day, and he had not one good thing to say about them. You try that today, and people, well, you got a mean spirit on you. You just an old grouchy, I don't know how many, you just an old grouchy man that thinks you're right. Well, I'm like Brother Tom. If I thought I was wrong, I'd be trying to figure out what was right. Jesus stood against him, and he didn't have a thing good to say about him, called him everything. And then look what he does. They had a track record of rejecting and killing every prophet sent to them. In love, God sent people to him. He didn't necessarily, delight in all of that stuff. But anyway, let's look at what Jesus says in verse 34 of Matthew 23. Or verse 32. Hold it a minute, Bruce. What's wrong with you? He says in verse 33, you serpents, you generation of vipers, how can you escape the damnation of hell? Wherefore, behold, I send you prophets and wise men and scribes, and some of them you shall kill and crucify. Some of them you shall scourge in your synagogues and persecute them from city to city, that upon you may come all the righteous blood shed upon the earth, from the blood of righteous Abel to the blood of Zacharias, son of Barachias, whom you slew between the temple and the altar. Verily I say unto you, all these things shall come upon this generation. O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, thou that killest the prophets and stonest them which are sent unto thee, how often I would have gathered thy children together, even as a hen gathereth her chickens under her wings, and you would not. Now look at this. Remember what he said when he cleansed the house? He said, my Father's house. He didn't call it his Father's house this time. He said, behold, your house is left unto you desolate. Your house. For henceforth you won't see me till you say, blessed is he that comes in the name of the Lord. Now, ladies and gentlemen, bear with me just a little longer here. When Jesus said, behold, your house is left desolate, he never entered the temple again. Ever. Never did. And he had said this, they're going to surround this, and he wept over the city because he saw what was coming. And if you've never read how Jerusalem was besieged and destroyed, they cried there in the scriptures when he was before Pilate and said, what doing? They screaming out, crucify him. And they hollered out and said, let his blood be on us and on our children. Well, it was during the scourge of Jerusalem when the Romans surrounded it, 500 per day were crucified. A day they crucified, they estimate that many. Dead bodies lay in the streets and on the hillside bloating where nobody even would bear. The seas in it would run red with blood. Starvation, people eating their own children. But you see, that didn't happen 10 minutes after he left. Your house is left desolate, and he left, and they went carrying just right on like they did for about 40 years. But the day come. Now, I said all that to say this. The United States of America cannot boast of God appearing on the hill out here in fiery flames or anything like that. I've been to a few other countries, and I was always glad to get back here. This country has been blessed. Where did that come from? Well, we just got some smart guys in charge. That's our biggest mistake. And now, there used to be a cigarette advertisement on television about a pack of cigarettes called Virginia Slims. I was a boy, I used to watch it. And they had this saying, you've come a long way, baby. Oh, there's no doubt about that. I will just mention a couple of things. But there was an ambassador, I think from France, as the story goes. I used to have his name wrote down. And he come and visited this country because the inventions were coming. Factories were opening up. While there was still things wrong, it was still very prosperous. When you looked at other nations, they were still with carts and one thing and nothing and poverty. Many of them still are. Starvation. And this country was just growing by leaps and bounds in modern inventions and trains and stuff, and commerce was booming and a-banging and everything else. And this man come to visit to see if he could find out what the secret was to America. And you could look this, I can produce it for you, but I don't know all I'm getting forgetful. And he said, I visited all over America, and I wanted to find out why was America so great. In comparison to other countries of the world, it's so great. Risen to a place of prominence. Whether or not you believe in God or anything, it still is a fact. These United States have risen to a place of great prominence. If it's so bad, why is everybody from all these other countries wanting to come here? When I was in Romania, Mexico, Nicaragua, all those down in Guatemala, they all wanted to come here. They surrounded me. Well, I was having to try. Let's go hear that American. You'd get a crowd. They don't know nobody. My own family won't even come listen to me preach here. I love you, Dad. You don't show it. I had to throw that in there for that. Yeah, I'm a little aggravated about that. But this ambassador, he said, I come and I examined all these things as to the greatness of America. And he said, I wondered why it was so great. But he said, it wasn't until I visited the churches in America that I saw why America was great. I saw those men in those pulpits aflame with the fire of God, declaring truth and mercy and justice and things of that nature. And it affected people and society in the way they lived. The church impacted society at one time here in these United States. I can remember it as a kid. We was over rolling dice and sneaking a puff of a cigarette and everything behind that old stove. Charlie had a big old, and we'd sneak back there and look and puff up. Here, Daddy comes over here, throw it back. You know. But if some church person comes in, you boys put that up. You shut that cussing up right now. It had effect. It don't no more. It don't no more, I can tell you. They'll go out of their way to say the filthiest thing in front of you. They can. Some of them women. At any rate, he said, I saw the pulpits aflame with ministers of righteousness preaching. He said, and America is great because America is good. And if it ever ceases to be good, it'll cease to be great. Now, I know there's always been sin and vice and corruption and everything. I know that. But there was just a time, where do you think, when we swore into office, they placed their hands on the Bible. That book was recognized. When I went to school, my teacher had one on the desk. And we stood up and said the pledges of allegiance and showed respect to our country. And if you'd have tried not to, somebody would have wore you out. And not only that, then we stood there, our Father, who bow your heads. And we learned the Lord's Prayer in school. The church had an effect on the country. The church is a stinking stench. And I don't care who hears that. Most of the world looks upon us, and the devil looks upon the church as a whole, and it's the laughing stock of hell. Now let's look at our country from where it come. I've got a book at home called Forged in Faith. It tells the story and the way America come down, the big movement. There was times they said you could walk by houses down any street and you could hear people reading scriptures to their children. You could hear them singing songs. It was a daily thing. You won't hear that now. You'll hear cussing and swearing coming out of a television and nudity and vile filth and everything else. Church members' homes. Now, so, let us look. God bless this country. You don't think we've been blessed? I've talked to people. I've told you the story how the guy took us around in Romania told us how they had one Bible amongst all of them, and they would wrap it in plastic and hide it in the woods in the ground and have to go out there at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, don't care what kind of weather, to pull it out and dust it off, and all of them read it by candlelight and hope they didn't get caught. It was illegal. I never had to do that. This country's got thousands of Bibles laying all over the creation. There's no reason for anybody to be spiritually illiterate. Now, but let's look at from this place of favor that we had, that we can all reflect back on. Yes, there was sin, there was corruption, there was wrong things going on, but overall, the blessing of God was here. Now let's come forward. And what I'm saying is, this country that put "In God We Trust" on its coins, that was known as a Christian nation, that printed more Bibles than any country in the world in more languages than anybody, and sent Bibles out to places that didn't even have one. Missionaries and people went to other countries to take the gospel, gave their life to dark regions. Songs were written, souls were blessed, churches were set up because of America financed those operations. The church, instead of trying to hoard up $40 million and build big cathedrals and impress the town, they'd take that money and pour it into missions. They've lost that vision now. Now let's look at the country. Number one, I'm just going to take a couple looks here. Abortion. Last time I looked, 60 million babies ripped from their mother's wombs. You know something? Them evil people, them evil lawmen, I don't blame them so much as I blame some lazy church that should have seen the signal. Hey, 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 danger! Rally around, sanctify, fast. This is serious business. Because your prayers have effect on what goes on in a nation. God uses prayer. And they too lazy, too busy watching the Twilight Zone and Matt Dillon. That was when all that come. I remember in 1963 when Madeleine O'Hara, one woman, petitioned and got prayer thrown out. Well, we kept on doing it for a while, but it worked its way out. I'm going to tell you a story here in just a minute that's going to make you sick. And you're going to say, Brother Bruce, you shouldn't be telling that in the church pulpit. I shouldn't, but I'm going to, because I hope somebody on this video hears it. So murder on demand. No prayer in schools. I remember talking in 1980 or 81 to a custodian. He said, nothing hurt me more. Said we were ordered by the courts of the land to go around and take plaques off of the wall that had the 10 Commandments. With hostility and hatred, we now have told God, we've sent him a very stern message. Get out. We don't want you. We don't need, we can bless ourselves. We're capable of doing for our own. And with a hatred and a heart that is darkened and a mind that is darkened with demonic power and influence, we have taken and thrown God out of everything. What my question is I wonder what God's going to do about all of this. I'll tell you this story. Brother Tom, you can scold me after it's over with, or any of the rest of you can. But I worked for a school in another state while I was preaching at a church. They call it pastor, and it wasn't a pastor. They don't want a pastor. They want some figurehead, somebody to make them look good. Well, I didn't make them look good. And I'm good at that. Anyway, at the school, I was responsible for the gymnasium, and it was sunken down in the floor, and you had the seats all the way around it. And when the game was over, I'd get my leaf blower out, and around I'd go. But anyway, I come in one day, and they had an activity there right before they let out of school, and they'd handed out papers. And, of course, kids do what they do. They look at them and throw them down. And that place was covered with papers all over. Well, just as well quit griping about it, get busy and pick them up. I picked a bunch of them up. What is this? And what? May I tell you what was on those papers? There were very, shall we say, explicit details as to how they could have safe sex. There were recommendations what you could do. There were information where to buy condoms and birth control, stuff like that, in a school that you cannot pray in. They didn't only do that. This is, brace yourself. This I know better than to talk like this, but just so you know, part of it gave instructions. If you want to have anal sex, use this type of gel and stuff, and went into detail. Right there, I saw that. I saw it. Wonder what's wrong with our kids. Now, I said all of that just to give you an idea. Was it 2014, 2015? I'm just showing you how far we've slid. Now, it is legal for two men to go up here and get a marriage license and marry each other, or two women. Our president lit the White House up in colors that represented the homosexual, lesbian, gay lifestyle. The leader of our country did that. These are not small things. Brother Steve posted a post that I watched the other night. I think it was Brother Steve. And it said, you know, that God's not going to judge a nation by the character of one man. He's going to judge it by the spiritual health of it, by what. Now, I'm taking a long, I just want to shut this up. I can't read that. I've run out of time. You know, people have told me, well, Brother Bruce, there's other countries in this world that's worse than us, and God hadn't judged them. Okay, I got you. But you look at some of them, they have not enjoyed the degree of blessing we have. And not only that, Jesus made this awesome statement. He said, to whom much is given, much is required. We've been given a lot. This country has been blessed, been bestowed with light on top of light. And yet this stuff is going on that I just sickening. Incidentally, I got on the radio and read it off. I want people in the community to know this is what they're doing up here in your school that you're paying. What did I hope to do, brother? I wanted to get people involved enough that they'd at least get up and pray about the thing. We've got this mindset that we've just got to accept whatever comes down the pike. And guys, I don't know how you feel, but let me tell you this. I don't buy that one. I don't buy that at all. Let me tell you why I don't buy that. We have an example in Scripture. We're told that we're to learn things by these Scriptures. They were written for our learning. Sodom and Gomorrah, you couldn't get much worse. I've read other booklets on that antiquities and all that tells what, my Lord, it'll make you just throw up the stuff they claimed that was going on there. And I believe it's true because when angels showed up, the men of the city came out unrestrained, no law enforcement there, and they wanted to rape those angels. I got some daughters here, you know. We don't want those virgin daughters. They're pretty, they're beautiful ladies, but I'm not. Can you see how degraded and how... Brother Tom Wright, when he talks about the depravity of man, there's not another creature on this planet can sink to the depths of man. And they wanted that. Well, it was bad, and God was going to go down and destroy it. But here's what Abraham, he said, what are you going to do? He said, I can't hide the thing. I was going to read all that, but there's no point. You can read it in your spare time. He said, I can't hide from Abraham the thing that I do. He said, this cry has come up so great. It's not that I'm ticked off. It's not that I've lost my temper. It's that it has gotten so bad that I'm a God of justice, and it demands I do something to stop it. It's got to be put. I can't allow this to go on, or I wouldn't be just at all. To this degree, it's always went on, but it's reached such a point that it's just ate up and totally consumed in it. And Abraham could have been like us. He'd have said, thank God. Whew, I'm glad you're fixing to do something with this. I'm so glad that you're fixing to get, But he didn't. He said, wait a minute. What if there's some righteous people down there? Are you going to destroy them with it? He said, what if there's 50 righteous people? He said, if I can find 50, I will, for the sake of those, listen to that, for the sake of a righteous element, I'll spare the country. He said, well, what if it falls just a little bit shy of 50? If you'd save it for 50 if it fell just a little shy for 4. You've heard the old saying,